Let me begin by doing something I tell my speech students to never do, with an apology, sort of. This is a pretty long lecture, but it intends to set up the last weeks of the course. So I hope you will bear with me and stick with me to the end of this multi-page lecture. With this week 9, we continue our turn in the direction of and begin to focus not so much on personal or individual formation, but on corporate formation and the role of the leader, pastor, ministry leader in this essential matter. Each of us has a call on our lives. In part, that call is personal. That is, to cooperate with the call of the Spirit on our lives, to follow Jesus in order to become more like Jesus. In the words of probably not very well known outside of England, Saint Richard of Chichester, patron saint of Sussex in England, which we probably all know better as part of the lyrics of Godspell. He writes, "Thanks be to you, our Lord Jesus Christ, for all the benefits which you have given us, for all the pains and insults which you have borne for us. Most merciful Redeemer," he prays, "friend and brother, may we know you more clearly, love you more dearly, and follow you more nearly, day by day, day by day. Amen." But this is important. For leaders in the life of the church, there's another responsibility, and that is the formation of the people of God who gather under their leadership in a particular time and a particular location. All that we will do now will move us in that direction, ultimately, of a congruent relationship between your own personal and pastoral continuing formation and the formation of the people of God. Those things are all intimately connected. You really can't separate them. But it brings us to this enormously important task, and that is the formation of a people of God at a certain time in a certain place, to which we are called either as pastors or as lay leaders. Clearly, the topic of leadership has been the dominant topic in the church at nearly every level for decades, often connected to issues related to church growth and the development of the role of what we have come to call the lead pastor, a term I do not particularly like. Amazon carries more than 57,000 books with leadership in the title. And Google Books lists 40 plus pages of titles on Christian leadership alone. This ongoing debate and discussion have led to many changes in the life of the church, and not always for the better. I want you to begin this week, after you finish this lecture and take the time to do it, to watch a brief video by Stanley Hauerwas. Hauerwas is an American Protestant theologian, ethicist, and public intellectual. For years, he was professor of theological ethics at Duke Divinity School. He's widely known, both at home and abroad, and is often seen as a kind of lightning rod. Some might even call him a gadfly in the American Protestant church, American Protestant Christianity. In this interview that I'm asking you to watch, he's responding to questions about leadership in the context of the church. In fact, the theme he is addressing is what only the whole church can do. I hope you'll watch that. Pay attention. You don't have to do anything with it except watch it. Listen to what he has to say, because he raises some really essential elements that I think of as central to our discussion going forward. He asks, well, what is leadership? He asks, what do you teach students about leadership? How do communities make space for innovation? Those are the three questions that he addresses in this 10-minute interview. Inherent and fundamental to the role of the pastor and ministerial leaders is the understanding that it's relational. You're not simply a pastor or a leader. You're the pastor of, or the leader of, people, persons, children of God, the beloved community. And you carry a singular responsibility for those persons. Listen to these familiar words as if you are eavesdropping. You're the pastor, you're the leader. Listen to these words as if we're one of the other disciples eavesdropping on this conversation, private conversation perhaps, between Jesus and Peter. When they had finished, we are told, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said. "You know I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And Peter answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time, Jesus said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." So a definition for leadership in the life of the church might be a sheep feeder, right? Or, of course, a little more friendly term, a shepherd. Leadership is finally relational. I cannot emphasize that too much. And no leader should think of him or herself as somehow above that or outside of that relationship that deeply and that they are deeply and inherently connected to the sheep. After all, remember, another statement from Jesus is that the sheep know my voice. That is an intimacy that is at the heart of living out a call to leadership. The last text for the course is called Practicing Theology. Here it is, of course, backwards for you. Practicing Theology, Beliefs and Practices in Christian Life. I chose it for several reasons. It's a different kind of book than what we have been reading and talking about. It is a text in practical theology. By one definition, practical theology is the theological response to key questions that arise in the life of the church. Richard Robert Osmer, a professor of practical theology at Princeton Theological Seminary and one of my favorite Christian educators, an ordained Presbyterian minister, poses four key questions when it comes to what defining practical theology. He says practical theologians ask these questions. What's going on? Why is it going on? What should be going on? And using the information from those first three questions, how might we respond? If you would like to pursue this further, you can check out the chart provided on Canvas that breaks these four categories into additional kind of explanatory words and tasks. The text utilizes such processes in approaching a variety of subjects common to church life. So what we're talking about is the theological application of theological thinking and truths to daily life in the church. That's what we mean by practical theology. So we're talking about, as the authors, the editors of practicing theology, we talk about healing, we talk about hospitality, we talk about the stranger, we talk about discernment and worship and other kinds of practices that occur in the life of a local congregation. We talk about race, tied up in the question of the stranger, and we talk about freedom. But the primary reason that I've chosen this text is because it focuses our attention on a provocative matrix of assumptions about leadership and community formational life, and connects with, and I think really flows out of some of the basic assumptions that you've been engaged with in Bonhoeffer's Life Together. Here's a set of statements that provide a kind of framework for how I hope you will address the book, or at least how the context within which you will read the essays that I'm asking you to read. This, as always, is printed and published on the appropriate on Canvas for the week. So if you want to go back and visit these to think more about them, I certainly would be a good idea. But for now, first, practicing theology is a theological text. As a discipline, theology arises from the scriptures and gives us a way to understand major questions in life. Who is God? What is God? How is God? And who are we in relationship to God? What does it mean to be a human being created by God? And how do we live with purpose and fulfillment in our world? How do we live out of a calling? What's the good life? How do we attain it? Those very basic questions that were part of our earlier discussion when we were looking at questions related to the human condition and human development and personal agency. Number two, it's a bridge text. By that I mean these readings that I'm asking you to deal with connect theological, biblical, historical, and ecclesiastical silos that too often don't talk to each other, and falls into the category, therefore, of practical theology. Number three, it addresses seriously the flux in the state of the Christian church, especially the American Protestant church, and suggests hopeful perspectives on the future. Many of us have a sense, I certainly do, that the church has a future, but we're just not sure what that future might look like. We also have a sense that the American church, not only Protestant, but also Catholic and Orthodox and all the other varieties that fit under that rubric, now seems to be losing. Of course, that perspective can only be reached by forgetting that it's God's church. Still, we wonder, right? If not in general, perhaps specifically about the shift from the local congregation to the megachurch. What's going on here? What's happening? Number four, persons in seminary are already in ministry of one kind or another and need to function. Your role in ministry is to function in part as bridges between theology and practice. You're the resident theologian, more than most. You have some training in theological thought, and you invite the church into that, and you'll read some wonderful stories of how that has happened. And finally, five, on a personal note, as you know, if you've been paying attention, I think one of the major general errors of the church made some decades ago is to diminish Christian education and discipleship training in favor of church growth. The consequent loss of formational, we might call them Christian educational practices, seems to have left a substantial portion of its members and of people in general without a strong foundation on which to withstand or even approach the challenges of those who would ignore the church or, as we see more and more in this day, use it for their own nefarious purposes. Now, we're not going to read the whole text, although I certainly recommend all of it as worthy to read, as helpful and important. I have selected a certain number of readings from the divisions of the book that I think are really essential and really helpful, and ones I think you should read for the purposes of this course. The introductory essay by Dorothy Bass must be read first before any of the other assigned essays because it lays out the specific understanding and perspective of the editors, addressing the question, but what does all this theological talk, God talk, as one of my daughters used to say, what does it have to do with real life? Well, my friends, everything. I suggest this is a question that all of us have to struggle with, wrestle with, and will continue to wrestle with at least the rest of our working lives. The book is divided into 4 sections: embracing a way of life, engaging in ministry, theology, and service. We will read from each over the next few weeks. Each section emphasizes a particular aspect of practical theology. All that we have discussed about spiritual formation and spiritual practice, I hope, will still be in your matrix as you approach the text. Think of each essay as a lens to consider one essential facet of theological and ecclesiological practice. The prompts for your responses are found where they normally are, in the discussion section of Canvas. We begin with Bass's introduction, which provides the introductory framework for the text and for the rest of our conversations together. It's followed by Dykstra and Bass's essay called A Theological Understanding of Christian Practices. Both of these are basic. That's why they're at the front of the book, right? They set up the framework. Provides the definition of practices, which we've mentioned before, although you may not have known that at the time, that underwrite the book's premise and the following essays, as well as the particular role that theological reflection plays in how practices work as formational in the life of the people in a community of faith, in a faith formational community. These 2 readings are essential, foundational, and set the framework for the book. I hope you will pay close attention to what these 2 important thinkers have to say. Good reading, eager to read your thoughtful responses. We'll be in touch.